Hi, I'm Lisa Shea. I'm here with talented author Andrew with his beautiful book Sacrifice, and he's going to tell us all about how he wrote this and what his motivations were. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, it's good to see you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Yep. So tell us about this book.
Well, let's see. Sacrifice actually goes back at least a decade. Um, yeah, I think we're in 2020. I'd say it goes back to at least 2009 because it started as a film project. It started as a screenplay that I wrote. Um, I had I had been working on short stories. I had written two like really very personal novels, like things that I was trying to figure out when I was in my 20s, how to write. And they weren't really going anywhere. I had gone to a couple writers' conferences and tried to pitch them. And I'd sent them around and got lots of rejections. And I had sent out short stories. And I started to get pulled towards writing screenplays. I'd met a few people. I had made some inroads and I had taken a trip out to LA and I met with a producer who liked some of my short stories, and he went on to we had a nice lunch. He wanted to make something kind of small and funny, and he thought one of my stories might work, and that didn't really happen, or I never really heard back after. And one morning I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and I got a call, and he said, "Do you have any horror movie ideas?" The same guy out of the blue, and I was like, in my head, to him on the phone, I said, yeah, sure. But in my head, I had zero ideas. I'd never written anything in the horror genre, nor had I actually written a screenplay at that point. And so I ran to the library, and I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time, and I did all this research looking for ghost stories. I think originally I was going to write a ghost story about descansos, which are the little crosses on the side of the road where children die or car accidents happen and things like that. And I thought that might be like an interesting sort of creepy story to tell. And I came across these stories of the Penitente, which was this cult that rose up in the 1600s, in the late 1600s in New Mexico, when the Native Americans fought the priests. They had a revolution against the priests who had taken over their communities and were running and teaching their children Spanish instead of the native languages and trying to take their culture away. They had an uprising and they forced the Catholic priests out of New Mexico and back across the Rio Grande. And what happened was there were some converts who escaped into the mountains up above Santa Fe and Taos area of New Mexico, and they hid out. And over the years, all they knew when they were hiding was the only ideas of the faith they understood were Christ's crucifixion, the torment that he went through leading up to his death. And so once a year, they would replay that story in their communities that they built up up in the mountains, and it would culminate in selecting somebody from the community to crucify.
Okay.
I said, well, that's a scary story. Like, that's a scary idea.
Yeah.
And so I transplanted that story and the culture, not the culture, but I transported the events to contemporary time. And right now, or really in 2009, I mean, I'm sure it's not a lot better now, but I don't know if it's quite as bad as it was then. But in 2009, Espanola, New Mexico, which is in that area right around between Taos and Santa Fe, was the #1 heroin overdose in the country.
Wow.
And so heroin and meth had made major inroads into northern New Mexico, and which of course became the basis of that show Breaking Bad, which was super popular a few years later. A few years after I wrote it, it started to become I think that's right. We're right around the same time. But it was the talk of where we were, and so I thought, well, this would be an interesting sort of blending of the drug culture of New Mexico and the women who want to eradicate the drug problem and this cult and faith. And for me, And I've been thinking about it a lot, because it's even part of another book that I have coming out, and it's been about projects going back to the very beginning. Faith is a huge part of like my horror. Like, I don't know if I would completely say that I was a religious horror writer in the sense of like a Frank Peretti and This Present Darkness, but growing up, they were big influences because my dad, like, I always read Stephen King, and my dad was like, "Why are you reading that trash?" He was a minister, he really didn't like it, and he would always try to push me towards Frank Peretti. And he's a very cult orientated, end times kind of spiritualist horror writer, and very much in the evangelical world. And there was a lot of that when I was a kid. I've been thinking about it because my new book has to do with the Satanic Panic and the 1980s and all this appropriation of religion in pop culture, like where Christian music, if you weren't quite good enough to be in a major mainstream band, you would make a Christian band because it was easier to break in because there was a smaller, niche audience and they needed the same stuff. So if you could sound like Van Halen, you could be Stryper. And so that weaved in sort of perfectly into Sacrifice were these ideas that I have of like, what does it mean to find redemption? What does it mean to, like, why do people who feel like they've committed really horrible sins feel like physical manifestations of that, like, help them feel repentant? And so I brought a lot of those questions into Sacrifice, and a lot of that came out of the research and my interest in my reading, throughout college and after, of the saints, and sort of, some of the, and of course I didn't grab any of these names up back, but there's certainly several major accounts of, stigmata and things like that go through the medieval sainthoods. And a lot of that is just a manifestation of the sins that they felt deeply coming into them physically when they feel like Christ has forgiven them. And so I wanted to have that sort of feeling in Sacrifice. So I went a long way from part of your original question, which was where it came from, that all those things culminated in a screenplay that I wrote in 2009, I think it was about 2008 or 2009. And it got some really exciting reception. And it looked like it was going to get made and it was going to be great and all this. And then, of course, as so many projects do, it fell apart. But I did, through it, I met some people. I found an agent. I met a producer for 60 Minutes who went on to work for Dan Rather. And he really liked my writing. And he hired me to work with him on a project for Dan Rather, which led to him getting a job with a production company. And I came in and became sort of a reader for that production company, read scripts for them, looked for projects, and he and I developed a pilot series. And so for about 3 or 4 years, I developed all these things and nothing was going anywhere. I had this movie that I'd written, I wrote another one, I'd written a couple projects with him. And I was like, wow, it's so hard to get anything off the ground. There's so much money needs to be involved, so many people are involved. That I was starting to lose my way as a writer. I was like, none of this is actually, it's just, all I do is spend time talking to people. I'm getting a paycheck, which is really nice. Sometimes now that I have kids and I'm in my 40s, I go, wow, maybe that was better than I thought it was. But at the time I was very frustrated. And my younger sister was very frustrated. She was trying to be an actress in Los Angeles, and she went through a very deep depression and left and came and lived in Albuquerque and fell in love with a guy from Alaska via Louisiana, I think, or somewhere.
Oh.
He went to art school in Louisiana. And he wanted to be a director. And he had a whole bunch of friends who were all wanting to be filmmakers. And so one day, and my sister's she's like you, Lisa, she's a real startup, get people together, make things happen. And I was a little more laid back, but she knew, but I could write. So they were like, let's make a movie. So we put together, I wrote a horror movie called Home Sweet Home, and we made it down in southern New Mexico, got the funding, got everything together, scraped together everything, got it done, got it made, got it out, actually got a really great distribution deal considering we didn't have a lot of money involved. We didn't have any big name stars or anything, but it made it into Target and Walmart and everything, and had like, you know, found a real audience way back in 2012. And so that was really exciting. And then shortly, a year or so later, my son was about to go to school, and we decided to leave New Mexico because the schools were so bad. We wanted to get back to Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided, my wife was from here, so we came back, and I was sitting here and I was doing some ghost writing, freelance writing for people up here that I'd met. I was writing for some startup companies, kind of helping them find their mission statement, and kind of work you do if you're a writer and you can't make any money off your real stuff that you're trying to do. There's always somebody who needs somebody who can craft an idea for them. So I was doing that, and I was sitting there at my desk, like at night between finding clients, and I was like, what do I have? What do I have that I could like try to get published, over the course of the next year? Mm-hmm. And I had this one book that I had written while I was here, and I was actively sending it out, but it wasn't really getting any traction. And I remembered my script, Sacrifice. And I was like, man, that would make as good a book, I think, as a movie. So I wrote that, and then it got picked up over the other one. So that was the road to this. And then shortly after that, I wrote the movie, the Home Sweet Home team wanted to do another one. Another production company came along, wanted to join forces and make another movie. So we made a cool treasure hunt movie in the desert, which was very twisty and turny, about these two girls who are PR directors. It was called At Your Own Risk. They were PR directors who get invited to do this sort of online treasure hunt where they go out and they beta test it for this company. And it turns into sort of a sadistic game where all the treasures that they find get used against them, and they're like left for half dead in the desert trying to find these treasures that everything they get kind of gets used as a trap.
Wow.
So it was kind of a fun movie, and it turned out well. It didn't have the success Home Sweet Home did when it got to market, which is a little disappointing. It's been tricky to figure out this new digital age,
mm-hmm.
how to get content to really fly. The way back then, if you could get a deal where you got into Walmart, like you could sell, hundreds of thousands of copies of a DVD. But now, I mean, you can get onto Amazon, you can get onto Tubi and Apple TV and all that stuff. But now it's a kind of a different road back to exactly where it was before, where you really needed a big name. Mm-hmm. Indie movies had sort of a marketing path they could take. And that path seems to be very different now. I don't know. I haven't figured it out, but I've been trying to write more books anyway. So.
Well, I think there's a lot more competition now that everyone has a cell phone or a regular camera. So there's so many more movies and books coming out that it's harder to be heard in the.
I think you're right. I mean, I think you're right. I think when it comes to books too, it's just like you said, there's so much noise. How it's hard to get a voice to penetrate or figure out their scene, to figure out what that angle is. But it's still a lot of fun to do.
Sure.
So.
Well, and I think that in the old days, Stephen King would come out with one book a year, and then people were sitting around waiting for the next book to eventually come out, and there weren't a lot of other options. Nowadays, you could like a sub topic of horror, and there's a ton of writers out there writing just in that one little topic area. So even if you drill down that much, you still have a lot of competition because there's so many people around the world that can now publish for free.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And there's like you were saying, hundreds of little Stephen Kings where I think people are like waiting, for each individual one, but that audience is so much smaller for each person,
mm-hmm.
But but it is always exciting when you do find the person who's like keeps writing you emails going, hey, is that next one here yet? Is that next one here yet? I don't have a lot of those, but every once in a while I have a couple who keep saying, and I'm like, now that I finally do, because it's taken me 4 years, it's exciting to be like, yes, actually I do finally got Halloween, have one coming. So that's always fun.
That's great. So on Sacrifice, did you find that being there in the location helped you bring the scenes to life?
I did. I absolutely do. Absolutely. I think I think being in New Mexico, I remember I would go out all the time, and it. I think it was written and written and rewritten many times when it was as a screenplay when I was in New Mexico, and one of the things I do remember, because it was over a couple of years. I mean, we wrote it initially very quickly, but then it went to so many different production companies and teams and things. Everybody wanted it changed some way or another. And I remember it was a great piece of advice that I got from the guy I ended up eventually working for, Steve Hernandez. And he's like, yeah, you have to be careful. He's like, the thing about Hollywood is that they will kill you with yes. They will keep telling you yes until you're dead and never actually do anything. And so he's like, you can write these projects over and over again because everybody's like, yeah, we love it, but we want you to do this, we want you to do this. And if you, and I am a very susceptible person to that. I'm not good at saying, this is done, move on to the next thing. I always like, every time I open a manuscript or something that I'm working on, I can find a new way to write the whole thing again and not actually finish it. So I think that's, but going back to your fundamental question is, I definitely think so. And there was this every year at Easter, they there's a pilgrimage that goes to the church at Chimayo in northern New Mexico, and people come as far as, I think they come as far as Truth or Consequences, which is 300 or 400 miles away, and they will walk all the way to this old, this beautiful old adobe church in the middle of the desert. And some people carry crosses, some people will flail themselves as they're walking, and like, so I would go and I would see this every year, just to kind of like reiterate. I mean, I guess it was only over the course of a couple of years, but I remember at least a couple times going there with a video camera that I had at the time, and just kind of like watching and looking, and certainly I would, as I was writing scenes, I would go to areas of the desert or areas of New Mexico where it was set, and like kind of look at the houses and look at the landforms and kind of get the details. And I think a lot of that had bled into the novel when I wrote it later, that were in the screen details from the screenplay. Because I think even just recently, I got a really nice email from somebody, who said they really felt like the land was its own character. The landscape was its own character in the book. And that, of course, made me feel great. So I was like, wow, I guess I did manage to capture some of the essence of New Mexico. And it wasn't hard for me in the sense that I love New Mexico. Like, it's been difficult to be back in Massachusetts. I love the desert. I mean, I had grown up here, and it's great schools. I quite enjoy my life here. I love kayaking and biking, and there's a lot to do. But but when I traveled around the country for four years after college, living in motels and living in state parks. I worked up in Jackson Lake Lodge in Wyoming and the Grand Tetons, and I lived and worked in Louisville, Kentucky, and up in Northern California. And I just roamed around and then landed in New Mexico. And it was one of those moments where you just kind of go, this is where I was always supposed to be. And so I was always felt very, very connected to that landscape, the way of life, the feeling. I remember a lot of friends who came out to visit me didn't quite understand. They were like, I miss the ocean. I would miss this and that. And I was like, yeah, I can understand. I do miss the ocean, but I don't miss it more than I love what I have. That's one of the things that I remember feeling there. And even since leaving, we were actually, until coronavirus hit, this summer we had this big trip planned. We had a house rented in Colorado, and we were going to take our kids to see the Grand Tetons, and then go down and see our friends in New Mexico, and take them around to Santa Fe and all our favorite spots and hikes and stuff. And then of course everything got sidelined by Corona, but I was very excited this year to finally go back, because I haven't been back since I left. So it's been about 7 years, which is
wow.
that I left that long ago. But it's also insane to me that my son's in 4th grade and we left kindergarten. So all of it's kind of nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But
so where do you get inspiration for your characters?
that's a good question. So I have to think back to what was it that inspired me with Sacrifice. Like, I have this other book that I alluded to, and that one's really easy because I used all my high school friends, because it's set during 1990 at the end of the Satanic Panic, and I actually wrote them all on Facebook one night and about it, and I was like, and one of them wrote back and was like, I think I'm gonna have to send this, a copy to this guy and this guy. And I was like, yeah, you figured it out. I was like, you guys are all in it, so you're gonna know that was so. But I didn't know any of the people in this world of where Sacrifice was set. I mean, I knew people in New Mexico, but I didn't know this world, and I didn't know the drug world, and I didn't know even the small town. I did meet a small town of the brother of one of the county sheriffs, one of the counties north of Santa Fe. And I did talk to him about kind of like what his world was like. What was it like, which is Boyd's character. Although Boyd was very much based on a corrupt county sheriff up there that I read about in articles. When I was doing my research, I sort of pulled his name. I kind of came across it randomly. It was actually even after we had after the name had been picked and I had started developing the character. I actually came across it. So it's funny now that I'm thinking back. So this church that they do the pilgrimage to, this Chimayo, and I talk about it a little in the book. There is this plot of dirt that's supposed to be miracle dirt. It's been blessed. They buried a saint in the ground there, and people believe that if they take the dirt home in jars, it heals them of different ailments they have. So people come from all over to Chimayo to dig up this dirt and take the little jars home. In the back of the church, behind the rectory, there's a room, and that room is filled with crutches of people who say they came, took the dirt, and walked again without the need of their crutches anymore, and they're hanging all on the walls. Mm-hmm. And it's really a really cool place. And on the wall there was this citation for this sheriff. Mm-hmm. And I went and looked him up, and a bit of a sordid past. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of exactly this character. So that was a very much one. It's funny. I wonder if Benny, the main character, like, I mean, I'm sure he's an amalgamation of several people that I knew. He's a documentary filmmaker. So some of the guys that I met later on, because we made Home Sweet Home probably 4 years after that when it was originated. But I can think of a couple guys that I knew around town who kind of made me think of Benny. I mean, I was just into my 30s when I started writing that screenplay. So a lot of these guys, like I had been there in my late 20s. So a lot of guys that I knew were in there around Benny's age, and certainly he was a struggling creative person. So I'm sure there was a lot of myself in it also, even though he's completely Hispanic and was probably based on some other people that I knew more than. There are definitely things I've written where I would be like, yes, that was definitely me that I put in there. He doesn't feel like me, but I can understand the plight of somebody who wants to be a creative and struggles to figure out how to make that path work. Right. So that is true. Diana definitely was based on a girl that I had knew. I didn't. she was a girlfriend of a friend of mine, and there were a lot of her personality traits and her name included kind of got put into that. I actually like, I don't know, I found her to be a really interesting girl. Like I was like, I can understand, you know, every once in a while, I don't know how you look for characters, but I noticed that every once in a while, like actually I was just writing a scene this morning about kind of a meet cute boy girl scene in a video store. It was really a scene that I had written before, and I rewrote it. I knew I wanted it to have more tension and more stuff, so I was trying to figure out how to exploit some of the other smaller characters that were in the scene, and it was drawing me back to people that I remembered from being in high school or whatever, and so I do find that that there's certain people who jump out at you, even if they weren't people that I specifically knew or had a romantic interest in. But I was like, I can understand, you know, what is really attractive, and they have like something specific that like kind of draws people to them, and they find their way into my stories. So those three for sure. I remember when my mother-in-law read Sacrifice right before it was published, was troubled that maybe I had used her for Cynthia, the villain's character, and which I did not. And she's very much not like her. But I was trying to think if there was somebody who I would have based Cynthia Armijo on. I mean, I guess over the years there were saying, I mean, I had a hardcore Nana from Scotland who was, you know, very brutal and, you know, and psychologically, you know, manipulative. I mean, she and I got along great, but I would not have wanted to be on the other end of her sort of shenanigans. So she definitely kind of might have been some of my, you know, loose things when it came to Cynthia. So yeah, I think that's the basic load of the characters. I know there's a few others in there, and I don't know. I'm sure they got inspired by somebody along the way. Oh, actually, one character who I love in Sacrifice is the guy who runs the morgue.
Okay.
And it's a poor town, so the morgue is doubling as like more than one place, and he's the pediatrician and the mortician, and so and there's a guy, and he wouldn't mind, I'm sure, if I even used it. He'd probably love it. I don't think he ever knows, because I've never seen him since I wrote it, but I knew him really well for a number of years. His name was Ed Borrego, and he was this gay man that I just loved, who I was working in a bar, and he would come in all the time. We had this great friendship, and he wasn't flamboyant, but I stole some of his lines. Like, he would always go to Arizona for his vacations, and he would always tell me how his because I was like, why in the world would you go to Arizona in the summertime? It's 105 degrees, can't be outside. And it's like, oh, everywhere I want to be is always the same temperature. I just want to be in the mall and I want to drink. So he was 1,000% the character that I wrote for that character in the story. I just lifted his whole personality because I just love that guy.
Well, and I suppose that's part of the benefit of traveling around and meeting a lot of different people, as you build this repository in your head of all these different character types.
Yes, I definitely, I mean, I remember some of my motivation for moving around was that. So because when I came out of college, I was going to go to Berkeley to study biblical narrative, or the Bible as narrative. And there was an amazing scholar there named Robert Alter, who's done major translations of, at this time, that's where he was. I don't know where he is now, but I do read his translations. But he's done these amazing translations of the Old Testament, and is an incredible linguist. And I was sitting after school, and I had just read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and I was going through that thing that ennui you go through when you're, you know, just out of college and trying to figure out what to do. And I was, a bunch of my friends, we had all agreed to go to San Francisco together, and we were all supposed to live up there together. And I got an opportunity to go to Europe, but I was going to have to wait 6 months. And I realized if I went up to San Francisco with my friends, I would have to get a job. It's super expensive. This was in the late 90s. So, or mid to late 90s. So it was like the bubble was still going with the boom, and it cost $1 million just to sleep on a floor in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, if I go there, I'm not going to ever be able to put away enough money to make this European trip happen. I was like, I'll just have to work. And although I was really excited to, it was like 5 of my best friends. We all were hanging around at the end of the last 2 years of college. And so I was going to go. So I bailed out on that. And my sister had just married a guy. She just graduated seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And she just got married. I felt like I didn't know my sister at that point in time. Like, we hadn't seen each other in years. We hadn't talked much. I was in college. She was off. And even late in high school, like, my brother and I were very connected. We had a great relationship. We loved each other, but we didn't know each other. And I was like, oh, kind of interesting to spend like a few months. They were like, you can come out and live with us. And he gave me a job at her husband was working at an optical store. And I would just call for the optometrist. I would just cold call all over the county, trying to offer, get people to come in and get their eyes examined, to bring business in. And that was like my job. And I was the worst at it. I was bad at it because I'm not good at sales. And I was really bad at it because there was these awful nightmare stories. Everybody told me about how they couldn't get their eyes examined because they had no health insurance and they'd lost their job. This is a very depressed area of rural Kentucky that I was calling. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a nightmare that I'd never experienced in Massachusetts, where I was had a relatively comfortable growing up. I mean, we were blue collar, and there was a little bit of like, I think a factory had gone down and some people were some of my friends' parents went out of work. So you kind of had some idea of like the difference between my friends who had parents who were lawyers and my parents who were friends who like were struggling a little, but they weren't struggling. Everybody still was fine. When I got to Kentucky, I saw, oh my God, this is like, people are really like, the rubber meets the road here. Like this is tough. And so I learned a lot over that 6 months, but I crashed with them for 6 months waiting to go to Europe. And then I went to Europe and I spent about a year backpacking over there, and it was amazing. And I came back from there. I was reading Cormac McCarthy, and I was sitting in my parents' driveway, and I was like, one, I don't want to be where I am right now. I was like, I loved Europe, but I was like, I really want to see the West. I've never been in the West. I'd gone on a road trip with a friend of mine across country and back, and I had fallen in love with the West. And I was like, I really want to go. I really want to live there. And I said, I really want to be a writer. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that means, but I know there's 2 things I know I don't want to do. I don't want to get an MFA. I was at that point, I had like subscriptions to Story, Quarterly, and all these like things. And I was spending every day at Borders. I think it was Borders. There's a Borders in Peabody, Massachusetts. I was going over there all the time and writing short stories. And I was reading every little short story magazine there was. And I was like, 90% of these sound like exactly the same stories, and all these guys have the same exact bio. They all went to Iowa, or they all went to Michigan State, or or some, I don't know, one of the big 5 ones. And I said, I don't want to write stories that sound like everybody else's stories. Like, I want to go carve out a path, figure out how to write, meet people, and then when I have a story to tell, I will be ready to tell it. Which is kind of ironic. Like, sometimes I get frustrated because I'm like, well, maybe I made a mistake, because they meet all these people, and that's what the MFA is great for. You get connections and you get to be famous and things work out for you. Although I'm sure there's like dozens and dozens of people, and only about 5 of them and fame wasn't really actually part of my game plan. But I realized, the other day I was like thinking about it, and I was thinking about some of the 3 big story ideas that I've been working on that I have, and I said to a friend of mine, I was like, if I would have written these stories in my 20s if I had these ideas, but I didn't. I was actually, my daughter and I were kayaking, and I said to her, she was asking me what else had I written, like what did I write when I was younger, and I told her about the 2 novels, and I was like thinking about them. One was about a kid who drives up to Maine. He has a spiritual crisis, and he flees to Maine and looking for this guy who used to work at the church where he grew up. And I was like, this was based on me. It has no commercial value at all as a story. And then I wrote one about a girl who falls in love with a lobsterman, and it didn't have any engine to it as a story.
Mhm.
So now when I look at the stories, I was like, well, I'm in my 40s and now I got it. I kind of understand. Like now I think I have some stories to tell,
Mhm.
whereas I don't know. So I don't know. Life's a weird, circuitous trail, but like those years out there and traveling around gave me stories, but I didn't have anything to tell at the time. I remember I was actually talked to a guy that I hadn't talked to in 20 years, named Steve Doyle, and he was an ex-lawyer who made millions of dollars suing the Catholic Church over. He was a major player in the sexual abuse
Mhm.
cases in the Catholic Church, and he had this huge mansion in Santa Fe, and it was overlooking the mountains. It was up on stilts. It was an amazing place, and he came into this bar. I worked at a really nice hotel called Inn of the Anasazi for most of the years that I lived there. I met so many interesting people through that. But this guy, like, he would come in and just drink white wine all night and chat with us. And he wanted to be the next John Grisham. He had quit his firm in Minneapolis. He had made millions of dollars. And he had come out to New Mexico to write John Grisham novels.
Mhm.
And he fell in love with me and this other guy that I was really good friends with, named Charles. And he was really excited by our passion to write. He wanted that around him.
Mhm.
So once a week, he would invite us up to his house and he would give us great wine and great fun. And we would sit on his porch and we'd all drink and talk and we would exchange short stories. And he was working on a novel and he would give us pages of the novel and ask us to read it, tell us our thoughts. And we were all really great friends. We'd invite other writer friends that we had and they would all come up. And I don't know, at some point there might have been about 10 of us meeting up there. It was a phenomenal time.
Wow.
And I was thinking about him and I was thinking about all those things because when I was talking to him on the phone, because I was like, back then, I just didn't have anything to write. I didn't have any of these ideas. I was writing every single day. I was getting up every morning at 6 a.m. I was going to the Starbucks downtown, and I would write from 6 to 10, or for 7 to 10. I think it opened about 7. And every day, I would just pile up pages. And I remember, Santa Fe is a pretty small city, so I knew a lot of people. And everybody, would see me every day and kind of say hi, and they would watch my pages pile up, and then a new one, and then they'd see me with the whole stack editing it, and then I'd be shipping it off, and everybody would reject it, and I'd start on the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting. It's interesting how you get back to those things, but now I feel like I have 2 or 3 stories, but I don't think I had them back then.
Mm-hmm.
Just a willingness to figure it out.
Well, I think it's all a process that you train yourself to write and train yourself to observe characters and all of that. And then at some point it coalesced. So I think it was all important stepping stones to get you where you are now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think that's what it now becomes the interesting thing. You can kind of put those linear patterns back into what you're writing. You can see where how story moves through people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And what things you can pull, how you can pull those little small incidents out and develop the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember I would read these awesome, amazing short stories. Well, I mean, I don't even know how to name them all, but Last Light by James Salter was always one that was amazing to me. But how he could take these like incidental moments where like somebody meets an old flame in a bar, and like the actual story feels like the entire life of them together over one glass of wine, and it's sort of amazing. And I think when I was reading those stories in my early 30s and late 20s, I was like, oh wow, that seems so easy. And then you realize, no, you have to know so much to be able to encapsulate what that night really means, and how do you filter the information to get that out to the end of that story. And when you're in, I think it's a little harder to do when you're in your 20s. There are some of these crazy people who are amazing at it and blow it out of the water and come right out of the gate swinging. And I'm always impressed. But I was not that person. I was a late bloomer for sure.
Well, I wouldn't say you're a late bloomer. I think you had talent all along, and you just found your niche topic to do it.
Yeah.
So when you're writing a horror story as compared to a non-horror story, with the horror story, how do you find layering in the horror? How does the process work for you?
Yes, that's a really good question. It's a really good question in the sense that every once in a while I embrace the horror writing and I go, how did I ever get here? Because it was never my intention. And actually, I've been looking back at the things that I love the most over the years, and I realized that the one genre that I love so much is the sort of romantic, erotic thriller.
Mm-hmm.
9.5 Weeks, Revenge, um, uh, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, things like that. And I've actually been developing, like after I finish this book and the one that I'm actively working on, after the one that comes out in October, I was like, I think I'm going to just spend a year just writing that kind of stuff. Because I was like, you know, I really like that more. And I did. I read a lot of Stephen King when I was younger, but I never thought of myself as a horror writer. I feel like I lied my way into it with that one early on producer where I told him that I had a story and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think a lot about that. How do you layer in scares? Because there's this book I've been working on, really struggling with, because I think it's going to be really good and I don't know exactly how to do it, called Daphne, about this sort of pop music star whose mom was a cult film star, and her mom had died on set of a movie, and when the daughter turned 16, she finds out that maybe she was killed, and she goes back to find this lost movie where her mom died. And I did a reading of it right before Corona hit, and in Salem at the end in the middle of winter. And it got really good reception. It was really exciting, like for me, like it was like kind of I had been struggling with this book for a while, and it's been like building on my desk, but I hadn't been able to, so I read the first 25 pages and it got really warm reception. And so I was like, wow, I'm on the right track. I know that I'm doing it. But I said to Tom Deddy after, who's another horror writer, really good horror writer, and he was there that night, and I said to him, you know, it's funny, I don't think this is a scary book though. Like, this is a book about things that are scary. This is a book about what people love about scary stuff, what creates cult movies, what creates cult stars, why are people drawn to scary things. But there's nothing intrinsically frightening in this story. And even when I look at Sacrifice, sometimes I'm like, is this a horror story or is this a really dark, gritty crime story? Like with some supernatural elements? Like, or are they not even supernatural and we just make them supernatural because we don't believe that there can be things that don't sort of add up in our life? Mm-hmm. Like, because I didn't look at Cynthia and the girls in her sort of her halfway house as like existing on another plane of reality. I thought of them as real people caught up with a passionate woman, and they were weak-willed people broken by their drug addiction who do some weird and messed up stuff.
Yep.
But I didn't think about it in the supernatural, or otherworldly realm of horror. Like, I know Stephen King says that, like, for him, he writes along about the people that he knows in his town until something comes out of the sewer, like until something weird happens, and then he takes a left turn into that weird world, and that's where he goes for 4 hours a day until the book's done. I don't know if I go into that weird world or if I skirt the edges of it and like kind of am like trying to do something that's sort of noirish that has that bends into pure darkness. At least with Sacrifice. I've always thought of Sacrifice as a very dark book. I tell people when a friend of mine was buying it for his mom for Christmas, and I was like, I just want you to know this is a really dark thriller. Like, he's like, I read it. He's like, oh, I didn't know he had read it. So I was
Right.
like, oh,
Right.
okay, that's very cool. I'm very excited. Please buy all the books you can. I would love to sell them, but I want you to know. I mean, I want to, because but, and it's funny, like even this new one, which actually has some real traditional ghost story elements. They go to the mansion of a silent movie producer to find this lost film. These three boys go, well, I guess 4 boys that go, and they spend the night there. And it turns out, and the house is, this one actually more than anything else is otherworldly, in the sense that you really don't know what plane of reality this house exists on, because there is like, as it goes along, maybe they're there all their life. And the house just keeps growing the longer every time they try to find a way out, it gets bigger. And then there are entities in it, but they're not ghosts necessarily, but they're like some kind of strange being that, and I don't want to go too far and ruin it, but so that does, but I don't know how scary it is. Like, and although I will say there was this one night, and I was sitting in my office, or actually it was the middle of the day, which makes me even more creeped out. And I was writing, and I don't know if I was just tapping into something from my own childhood, because I was pulling some stuff that growing up, because I had like as an adult, when I look back on some of the stories my dad would tell me about his experience, like in the church, and his, like the way his belief in God went, I go, okay, this isn't exactly where my belief in God goes necessarily, because he and my mom had like started like a commune within the church, like a smaller commune where they all were like, let's pool our money, let's get a house together, let's all live together, and return to the way it was, Bible times. And this was like right before I was born, right when my sister was born. And there was a lot of weird stuff going on in this little small town of Byfield, Massachusetts. And like, and I think a lot of it probably had to do with like the hallucinogenics were really big at that point in time. But like these people would come to our house, like, and he would tell these stories about like praying for demons to lead people, and the house would shake on its foundation, and all these really terrifying things. And as a kid, it sounded like so exciting, but as a grown-up, I like think back and I'm like, ooh, this is kind of weird. So a lot of that stuff is poured into this book. And there was a morning where I was writing, and I started like feeling like doors behind me were opening, and like things were happening, and I was like really kind of creeped out. I actually went downstairs and I was talking to my wife. I was like, I'm a little scared to go on, but I was like, I think I'm tapping into something that's real and vital inside of me, that like will translate, I hope will translate onto the page. So I know that I do think concretely about like, okay, how do these scenes have to add up to tension? Sometimes I think of it more technically. I think that shorter paragraphs, shorter sentences, really do it. And it's not sort of as easy as just writing one sentence, but it's really the stripping down. Like I tend to be a major editor. So like I'll write all this stuff out. Like today, like I was like looking through some stuff, and I'll take 50 pages and condense it down to 10.
Wow.
And as I do that, I think it gets deeper into each tension, and then I layer more in. I'm like, okay, I know what's at stake for these guys, but there's nothing that's going to translate into an audience. So I'm going to add another, like, I'm going to take this character who was kind of sidelined over here and give them a reason to be upset about something and bring them into the conversation and add another layer, or maybe he notices like one of the, this character and this, this boy and this girl sort of notice each other while they're talking. And there's like kind of a chemistry going on there so that adds like another element to draw the reader in while I'm downloading all this information about this, this missing film and this actress and all these elements that that could naturally be an information dump. I actually think there's also a really great book I read, which I reference back to constantly, called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And what he calls it is, it's the Pope in the pool. If you have to stop everybody and tell them a whole bunch of information to get your story out, you got to put the Pope and have him stand in the middle of a swimming pool telling the story, because nobody notices that you're giving all the information if it's the Pope standing in the middle of a swimming pool. You have to distract the audience with the one hand, like a magician does, and then tell them all the information they need in order for the story to get to the next level. So I think about that all the time when I'm writing. And that plays sort of a major role in like how I decide to put in tension, which is one of the things that, like, as a younger person, I was very, like, I thought that writing needed to be like literary fiction, and everybody that I read was like Updike and all these people, and I was like that's all well and good, and then at some point I realized, no, if you like take some of these elements and you blend them up in the mixer with a genre, or even blend up a couple different genres, then it's suddenly like really interesting. Because I find, like, in my 40s, I go back to some of these writers that I thought were amazing, and they were like the cat's pajamas when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I can't even read them. I'm so bored. Like, I was like, where's the story? Where are you going? Like, all these people are just sitting around talking. I think the Last Light example is a little bit different. He really does something magical, and a sport and a pastime about this the young man who falls in love with a French girl in France is a riveting and really exciting story. And I think about that a lot when I think about the erotic thrillers that I want to write, because he is just a beautiful master at writing this sort of erotic stuff that's still extremely literary. And so that excites me. But for the most part, I do think that, like, taking a genre, like whatever I'm trying to do, as like trying to take a genre and throwing it in the mixing bowl with some elements that I think are, are asking bigger, or maybe either they're asking bigger questions, or I'm interested in some kind of cosmological question that's beyond the page. So yeah. So I mean, I guess when I approach adding horror, I think about it, especially in the editing process, especially going back, paring things down, taking stuff out, and drilling down into the tension of what's happening with these characters, and what information do I need to get the story moving to the next stage.
Well, that's great. Well, geez, we've already hit an hour, so.
Have we really? Wow.
Yeah, time flies. No, it's fascinating stuff. So see, I'll have to have you come back again so I can ask you some more questions.
Absolutely, I'd love to. This is fun. I love this.
All right. Well, all right. Where can people find Sacrifice?
I think Amazon would be your best bet. Unless you live in Santa Fe, a friend of mine has a shop there and he sells it there. It was at all the Barnes and Nobles, like between here and New Hampshire. Jabberwocky Books had it for a while in Newburyport, but I think they're sold out, and I don't think they've reordered.
I think they're having problems right now.
What?
I think they're having problems right now.
I think so too. I think a lot of small bookstores are having a really difficult time, and I can understand. I mean, the coronavirus has been a nightmare for so many people, and bookstores especially. It's a tough place. I was saying to my sister the other day, because we've been relatively quarantined in my house because my wife's got some illness issues, and so we have been taking this extra vigilantly. So we really don't go very many places. But I said to my little sister, I was like, the honest truth is, there's not a lot I do. I like going to the movie theaters. I like going to coffee shops. I like going to bookstores, and that's it. That's all I like. I don't like to go out. I don't at night. I do miss going to restaurants a little bit, but I can take that or leave it. I'm okay with that. We don't do takeout because we're still a little concerned about some aspects of that. Yeah. And that I miss. I actually like taking out and taking it home and eating. I'm sick of cooking at my house. I love a break from that, that's a real bummer. Bookstores just bum me out because if I do pick up at Target, like they put it in I'll order it on my phone, and then they just put it in the trunk of my car, which is super awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
But I drive by Barnes and Nobles every time I go up there because there's one right down the street from my Target, and just because I want to know it exists still, even though I won't go inside out of fear. But like so I just desperately miss wandering around bookstores, going into Cambridge, wandering through Harvard Bookstore, one of my favorite places on earth. So you're right. I think that's hard. So I think I don't know. I mean, the last time I was in the one in Salem, New Hampshire, they still had a few copies of it, but I think for the most part, Amazon's the best bet for finding my book.
And where can people find you on the web?
At Desert Horror on Twitter and at Desert Horror on Instagram. Andrew Boylan on Facebook. I have dissolved my website with the plan of reviving it eventually. I haven't got there yet. Wasn't getting a lot of traffic anyway, and I really wanted to reimagine what it could be. So one of these days, maybe with the next book coming, I'll get really motivated to get it back up and running. But I don't have a website anymore.
Okay.
I have a MailChimp newsletter, and I send out short stories and discounted books, and I give away free Stephen King books every month. But that's about all but I'm very active on Desert Horror on Twitter and Instagram. I post pictures of books mostly on Instagram. Do a lot of bookstagramming, and then just things I find interesting. But I'm on Twitter all the time, tweeting about stuff, retweeting cool like things other authors have said, or books that are coming out, or interviews, or and pretty much anything I think is interesting. McSweeney's. I love McSweeney's stuff. So every time I see a funny thing on McSweeney's, I retweet it. I love retweeting stuff on Twitter. So I'm on there way more than I should be when I need to feature.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me. Hopefully we'll
My
get
pleasure.
to chat again soon, and we'll see if we can set up the horror panel with a couple of the other authors like Tricia that we were talking about, and
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love that.
get some topics.
That would be great.
All right.
Thank you so much for letting me be on this with you. It's been a lot of fun.
Sure. Have a good afternoon.
You too.